Okay. Hi guys. So I would love to introduce one of the best people in all of Los Angeles. This is John Schneider. He is recognized internationally as a guitarist, composer, author, and broadcaster. He's got weekly television and radio programs where he has brought the sound of the guitar into millions of homes in the last 30 years. He holds a PhD in physics and music from the University of Wales, music degrees from the University of California, and the Royal College of Music in London. And he's also the past president of the Guitar Association of Foundation of America. He's a specialist and expert in contemporary music. He's got the contemporary guitar, which has become the standard text in the field. He also works as a professor at Pierce College in Los Angeles. He is the director of Just Strings, which is the Parch Ensemble, and his radio show Global Village can be heard on KPFK, which is 90.7 FM in Los Angeles weekly. And he has just come back from a tour in Spain, I believe?
No. Amsterdam, Berlin.
Oh, Amsterdam or Berlin. Sorry, wrong country. I knew it was somewhere exciting.
Rainier.
Anyway, so please welcome John Schneider.
Hello. Behind you is a very pretty picture. So this is what we had loved to do for you today, but the space isn't big enough, not everybody was in town, so instead we brought them from the past. But the instruments you see being played on stage at Red Cat in Disney Hall are all around you. Sadly, with the one exception of this monster, beautiful bass marimba that's right up here. Because that's one of our lowest instruments, I thought I'd bring at least one that was a little bit lower. Nice. And on this side, we have different?
Yes.
Yeah.
How? Deeper? Lower note?
Yeah.
Right? Same note. What's up with that? Why do they look so different? Well, that was Mach 1. That's the better one. This was my first experiment. This is the second one. This was done by a professional friend of mine. He said, no. You don't want a pipe that's this skinny. And you want a wider key. You want more air moving. And if you want a lower frequency, you have to change the Helmholtz resonance. Duh. And there it is. And just in case it isn't quite right, there are these little tuning paddles right about here. So you can get it just about right. Anybody heard of Helmholtz before?
Yeah.
German scientist, what the hell does that have to do with music? He got interested in hearing and music a long time ago, 1840s, 50s, and 60s, and started exploring. And like everything else he touched, I mean, he was a polymath. I mean, he invented all sorts of amazing things. He was one of the great scientific minds of the 19th century. This was a hobby, right? He wrote a book. It got translated into English. He was German. Harry Parch found the book in a library and started reading and thought, okay, so where was Harry Parch before he picked up that book of Helmholtz? He had just dropped out of this really weird music school. You may have heard of it, it was called USC. Harry Parch, the guy that imagined all this stuff and actually created and wrote music for it, started out his life wanting to be a classical piano virtuoso, playing with all the great orchestras of the world. He came to USC to learn how to do that, and he took a harmony class. And he said after 3.5 months of learning how to resolve a dominant seventh chord, he said, that's it, I'm out of here. This makes no sense to me. And he started to realize that the sounds he heard in his head and the sounds he thought were possible weren't happening at USC or anywhere else on the planet. So it wasn't SC's fault. He then started doing a little research in libraries, ran across Helmholtz, who said, you know, there are so many pitches, so many notes that we can hear that are not being used. The rest of the world uses them. Why doesn't Europe? Why doesn't the Western canon use all these notes? And that got Harry thinking, and he started with one instrument. This was his first musical instrument. Well, not exactly this. In fact, everything that is in this room, all of these instruments are copies. These are not the originals. The originals, built all the way between 1929 and 1972, when he died in 74. His last instrument was in 72. They were in New Jersey, of course. Why New Jersey? They're alive and well. They all moved back east for a huge opera performance in 1989, and the guy that had them said, enough, and he handed it off to the next generation. They are now in a purpose-built building at Montclair State University. And if you get so excited today by this that you say, you know, this is my future, you can actually go to Montclair State University, why would you otherwise, sign up for music, and you can get a minor in Harry Partch. You can play on the original instruments, and part of your final project, you'll be glad to hear, since guess what you're doing in this class, you have to make your own musical instrument. That's part of the deal. You go through his path, you follow his path, and then come up with something of your own. So imagine Harry has dropped out of SC, he's wandering about doing all sorts of strange jobs in the 1920s, and he starts experimenting with the instruments he knows how to play. Violin, cello, keyboards, mandolin, guitars. But the bowed string instruments are the only ones that can get more notes to the octave than what he's found on the piano, because you only get 12 on the piano, not too much. So he made this thing. It's called an adapted viola, because it's, well, it's a bastard actually. It's a Frankenstein. This is a viola. This is from a cello. And the strings are sort of halfway in between. It's an octave below a violin. This is like the second string of a cello. So this is G, D, A, or if it was in tune. So let me get in tune and show you what this puppy can do. Any string players in the room? No. Here's why I asked. You may know that in the early music world, the buzzword has always been, up until very recently, authenticity. You don't want to play Bach on the piano because Bach never even saw a piano until the day before he died, just about. And if you want to play violin music, you don't want to play it with steel strings, because that wasn't normal until the 19th century, or even the early 20th. This instrument is strung with gut strings, because that's what Harry used, and it's a different sound. The reason they don't use gut is that if you sneeze, they go out of tune. They soak up humidity, the change of heat, etc. So this was perfectly in tune 3 minutes ago. It'll take me 2 notes, it'll go out of tune again. But when it's playing, it's really cool. So let me start by playing a piece, if you don't mind. This is one of the first series of pieces that Harry wrote from 1930 to 1933. He set a series of poems by the medieval poet Li Po. Under a cold moon, we were drinking heavily together. Frightened by our orgies, a white herring flapped out of the river shallows. It was midnight. not Bach. So the first thing you'll notice, of course, is things like this. Now normally on a, you get the 7 notes of a scale, or if you're lucky, there's the octave. 12 notes to the octave. This, however, you may have noticed, it has microtonal measles. These dots that are on the fingerboard show me exactly where to put my finger for other notes in the octave. There are enough dots. Well, let me play the dots for you. That's just a perfect fourth. That was 29 notes per octave. Those were just the ones he put dots on. And in a moment, we'll go in the other room and visit a keyboard instrument that he retuned. The famous number for Harry Partch is 43. 43 notes per octave, not 29, but 43. And he said that's even just a quarter part of a half-truth. There's so many more. Sometimes he used 55 notes per octave, sometimes he used 4 notes per octave. But those little extra notes, he uses musically as a way of introducing things, but they come from a whole different world, which hopefully we'll have enough time to discuss. So this is the adapted viola, his first musical instrument, and what it did was break open this whole new world. Here's the point. Way back when, he's playing piano, he imagined another kind of music. He felt that the essential connection of music is one person to another, one melody, one voice. But he said the musical instruments we use should follow the voice. We shouldn't make the voice follow the musical instruments that we have. Because if you only use those notes, then it sounds like opera, doesn't it? And it's not exactly like real voice. I mean, since I've been talking, my voice swoops up and it goes down. It's not on discrete scale steps. So he wrote music that used that sort of thing. One of his very interesting pieces is called San Francisco, the cries of 2 newsboys on a foggy street corner in 1929. It begins with some interesting stuff on that instrument, and then comes in the viola. We find out a minute later that that's actually somebody going, Chronicle. Of course, on the other side of the street is this guy. Examine baby, examine baby, examine baby, examine baby. And he weaves those two things together in music. No one had ever done that before. And that was his great, I think, besides this amazing array of new tones, new kinds of sounds, a way of putting vernacular speech into music that people have been trying since. I mean, that's why they invented opera way back when. They were trying to marry tones and drama and speech. And Partch went his own way and ended up creating all these wild things in the meantime. He adapted a viola. The second instrument that he attempted to adapt, and did not succeed until quite a few years later, was the organ. He ended up taking a reed organ, which normally that's 6 octaves. That's a very big range. But he jammed all 43 of his notes into. There's that same G to G. Look how many pitches. That's a major third. My God. Starting at the beginning. can't go far enough, you don't have enough hands, right? And normally you could do that chord with one hand on a piano. Not here. So this is the concept. Let me do that now with keeping it constant. So what about those multiples? For example, here's a note F. Here's another F. Here's another F. They're all very close, right? But they function slightly differently. If we had time, I'd go into the whole long explanation about the overtone series, harmonics, how they generate their own notes, and how every note has its own character, its own particular, well, Parch called it an identity. So if this F is 1, 3, 5, 7. It's the 7th harmonic above this. This one isn't related to that at all. This is related to a C. Beautifully in tune. G, C, F. But it doesn't lock like that. Do you hear how that one just sort of, it blends. It blends into the original note. That doesn't. That stands apart. Whoa. Think of any blues singer. Composition for these instruments and writing it down is a whole other story, because with all these notes per octave, musical language is developed for, well, 5 lines, right? A, B, C, D, E, F, G. It can hardly handle 12 notes per octave with the sharps and the flats. What in God's name do you do with 43? Or more. Some people have come up with more. There's a Mexican composer who in 1898, Julian Carrillo was his name, he came up with, he called it Sonido 13. He found the 13th sound. Meaning he just found something that was a little bit off-center and he thought, maybe there's more. He ended up using 96 notes per octave. Not tuned to the overtone series, just arbitrarily chopping up the notes you find on the piano into smaller and smaller bits. And just as an aside, those are the 2 great avenues of microtonality. Those are the 2 wimpy little side streets. Because everything I'm saying to you today, this is still, what year is this? 2010? This is almost a century after this stuff was created and used. It's still kind of cutting edge, because people haven't quite got it yet, but they're starting to. So this was the next instrument that he started to work on. It didn't work. It just didn't work at all. It had to wait until the 1940s for it to really take off. This is a copy of the 4th Chromalodion, this is called, right? Chroma for color, right? And when you have a chance, you ought to take a look at the keys, because they're color-coded. Do you remember the microtonal measles on the adapted viola? There's colors everywhere. Those are not random. His basic world was the root, 3rd, 5th, 7th, 9th, and 11th of a chord. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple. You know, colors of the spectrum. Grateful Dead colors, right? So all of these notes have 2 colors, because it turns out that he judges notes in relationship to this. Everything comes back to this one G. Oh, and by the way, it goes higher and lower too. That's just 1 octave if you want. Go higher, you can go. If that's not low enough, sub-bass. Sort of as a schematic of the frets on this instrument. In 1935, Parch made an adapted guitar because he wanted something that could play harmony. The viola was fine for melodies and that sort of thing, but he needed something that would do chords. So this is basically It even kind of looks like a real guitar, right? It's got 6 strings, it's got, well, okay, so it stops looking like a real guitar after that. Except if you're a guitarist, you'll recognize this note immediately. The 3rd string is, of course, G, just like a regular. The 2nd string has been moved over to the 1st spot, it's a B. Now it happens that it's a pure B, which is another story. And then he doubles it, just like a 12 string. So you got 2 Gs, 2 Bs. Now normally below the G is going to be a D, but he goes to an E flat. So it's tuned in major thirds with a double. So we got 2 E flats, 2 Gs, 2 Bs. So a little bit like Messiaen. Wait a minute. E flat to G, major third, right? G to B, major third. Any music majors in here? What happens when you stack a major third on top of a major third?
You get an augmented chord.
You get an augmented chord. From hell. It just doesn't sound like our regular augmented chord, but that was the point. These new notes connected with each other in such a way that he got the chords you know and love. But you also got some really wild minor chords. These augmented chords, 7th chords, or some chords that sounds nice, right? But you could also get some very odd new harmonic colors. The concept, this whole thing, when I was talking about those 2 byways of this new world, of course, the big banner is microtonality, right? Notes that are smaller than what we're used to. The 2 highways, let them be highways, is just intonation, meaning pure intonation, that the notes of the scale are evolved from the harmonics that are inherent in every pitched sound, in my voice, in your voice, in any plucked string, in any brass instrument. The other way is like sonido trece, right? You just take the existing octaves and chop into smaller bits just to get cooler, newer colors, but they're not related to each other in that special sort of way. So this instrument came about, and I was trying to play a little music for this one too. In 1941, Partch was, well, let me back up a little bit. 1930s is when he was dealing with all this, right? History, 1930s, California, depression. He did not have any work, to say the least. He did get a grant, however, from the Carnegie Corporation to go to England and study intonation. This is all found in this amazing autobiography of his called Bitter Music. 7 or 8 months of his life in the middle of 1935, he kept a journal and actually set some of it to music. It's going to be a CD out next year. I just finished recording it yesterday, so it's a very interesting story. And he tells the story of this instrument, that he bought it in New York before he went to England, and when he got finished working at the British Museum every day, going over these old volumes like Helmholtz and all the things about tuning, he started to mess around with frets on the guitar, and it didn't work very well. He ended up cutting slots in the fingerboard and pushing in frets where he needed them, just sort of like putting in type, right? So eventually, he said, to hell with it, and we'll get to those in a second, and used a slide because the frets weren't working. But for a while, he did use a fretted instrument. In 1941, he was hitchhiking through California, and he ended up stuck in Barstow, California. Oh my God. He was stuck there, and evidently there was a highway railing where he was hanging out, and the other people that had been stuck over there didn't have much to do, so they wrote graffiti on there, right? They wrote the stories of their lives, their phone numbers, their addresses, their philosophies, a lot of 4-letter words. So Harry set some of these to music. And one of my favorite, and I think probably his best composition, is called Barstow. I'm going to do just a couple for you. Number 1. It's January 26th. I'm freezing. He's 19, 5 foot 10 inches, black hair, brown eye. going home to Boston, Massachusetts. It's 4 and I'm hungry and broke. I wish I was dead. But today, I am a man. Going home to Boston, yeah, Massachusetts. It's 4 p.m. and I'm hungry and broke. I wish I was dead. But today I am a man. I'm going home to Boston, yeah, Massachusetts. Number 2. Gentlemen, go to 530 East Lemon Avenue in Monrovia, California for an easy handout. Go to 530 East Lemon Avenue in Monrovia for an easy handout. Gentle. Yo, go to 530 East Lemon Avenue in Monrovia for an easy handout. Gentlemen. Yo, etc., etc. 1938, he's back in LA and he signs up downtown Los Angeles for an adult education carpentry class. And he makes that. This is called a guitar, K-I-T-H-A-R-A. You've seen them on Greek vases, art students, right? This was one of the 2 favorite plucked stringed instruments of ancient Greece. But it didn't look like this, I guarantee you. When Partch was in London, he met with a woman who had been researching all of her life musical instruments from ancient Greece. And he saw a sketch of one of these. He thought, you know, that would be cool, but I wonder if I could make it my way instead of her way. So what we have, it's a harp, usually, right? Originally, it was just a box with 7 strings in a row. Later, it got 12 chromatic strings. But he ended up doing not 12 strings all the way across, but 12 chords. So it's a harmonic harp. There's 6, there's 6, there's 6, there's 6, there's 6. It's almost like if you tuned 12 guitars to open chords and lined them up all in a row, then took away the necks. And this is the soundboard, right? What are the notes? Well, you remember that 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11 thing. Now, musicians know all about triads. 3 notes, root, 3rd, 5th. We never talk about root, 3rd, 5th, 7th, unless you're Roy Orbison. Da, 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 da. Right? It's a famous thing, right? But his 7th note doesn't sound like this. So it's root, 3rd, 5th, 7th, 9th, 11th. Here's the chord. Whoa. Any jazz players in here? Yeah. Sounds like an E7 chord with a flat 11th, right? It's an 11th chord. Sure. So here they are. You got those 6. So we got. Those are called the overtone series, of course. But he also did something because literally the frequencies, if this is 1, this is going to be times 5, times 6, times 7, times 10, etc., etc. You can also create an undertone series where the frequencies are created by a half, a third, a fourth, a fifth, a sixth, and a seventh, etc. of those frequencies. And they turn out a very strange chord. The top part of which, whoop, that's not the same. It's a minor chord. calls these, because they're overtones, he calls them O-tonalities. Overtonalities. These are called U-tonalities, undertonalities. Now, it'd be pretty stupid to make a harmonic instrument that only played 12 chords, right? So, what if you want something in between? That's what this is for. And anything in between. So this side, that's the major one. And this one is the minor. So we got major and minor on each side. And of course, who could resist? In some of his pieces, he actually goes, which means nothing, right? But it's fun. 1945, I want to jump ahead to this instrument because these two are related. He actually got a gig at the University of Wisconsin working for a year and a half. He never stayed anywhere more than a year and a half, it turns out, throughout his whole life. And he made a demonstration of this root, 3rd, 5th, 7th, 9th, 11th thing, right? And it's called a tonality diamond. He didn't invent it, but he took it to its logical conclusion. Originally, this lovely terraced marimba was not terraced. It was flat. All these keys were absolutely flat because he wanted to show different relationships. Now, who the heck is going to make an instrument that has the same note on it? That's a little weird, right? You got one, why do you need another? Because, in terms of music theory, it makes sense. So here we go. G is the center of his world, and this is how this whole system, this is Bartsch's music in a nutshell, right? This is a demonstrator. So, here the G is the root. Root, 3rd, 5th, 7th, 9th, 11th. Now we move over to this hexad, and now it's the 3rd. It's a little dead. We'll use this one. Now it's the 5th. Pretty Woman one, right? Now it's the 9th. One, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, and 11. Ooh, that's out of tune. Damn, I just tuned that too. By the way, because this is a sound art class, we're going to have to talk about that. How the hell do you tune these things, right?
Yeah, I was just going to ask
Oh. If you would see the underside of these things, the blocks are tuned by cutting an arch. First, you choose the length, then you cut the arch, then the fun starts. If it's a little too sharp, you scrape away wood from the center. If it's too flat, you scrape wood from the sides, and the pitch goes back up. It's exactly the way you tune the reeds in that reed organ, too, that look like tiny little harmonica reeds, right? They're about that long. So... So that was his demonstration. And then he thought, wouldn't it be fun if I could do what I just did? What would happen if I tilted them? That way you could play chords. I absolutely challenge any marimba player in the world to play 6 notes in a row this fast. Can't do it, right? But if you do them all in a row, beautiful, right? So, fabulous. Those are the overtonalities, right? But wait, if you go the other direction. They're the U-tonalities. So you got the overs and the unders. And you can see it's a very strange chord, right? But that's that. If this is in tune. It's a different octave, so it's a little hard to hear. But each one of these hexads is here. So here is the C minor chord. The 5th, excuse me, the G is now the 5th. this direction, major, in this direction, minor. Wow, right. Now the music he writes for. Are those two different notes? This is going to be like the eye doctors. Which one is clearer? Which one is higher, number 1 or number 2? I'll do it again. Number 1, number 2. Very good, absolutely. And you can tell because if you play them together, they fight. They get those beats together. So there's one of his pieces called, what is it called? The Heron. So he's using that little bit, root third, perfect fifth, 2 sharp, there's, what a beautiful phrase. And he finishes the piece with it, leaving you slightly suspended. Right? Amazing. So the Diamond Marimba. Now the marimba world, of course, he went a little nuts with, and you saw the big bass marimba, which is this high. It's so tall that you actually have to stand on a 3-foot riser in order to play it. And again, I'm sorry you couldn't make it. It's not feeling well today. But in terms of percussion instruments, those are the marimbas. But he then made something called a marimba eroica, heroic marimba. These notes are so low that it's just darn dangerous. And these two guys that I played for you earlier, this is A 55 cycles per second. I cheaped out and did a metal key instead of a wooden key. In Harry's day, he actually used quarter sawn Sitka spruce. Fabulous wood. I mean, that's what they make guitar tops, violin, double bass tops on. Very expensive these days. It also turns out they used to make masts for sailing ships out of them. So if you go to a wrecking yard, a naval yard, you could still find like 100-year-old Sitka spruce. But it's a pain in the ass to move too, because it's big. Imagine how big the keys are going to be. Now his marimba eroica, that was the highest note. It went from there to here to here to so low. It was 22 cycles per second. You can barely even hear it. And he invented a new kind of resonator for it. It wasn't on a tube. It was a cavern resonator. Here's a perfect image. If you would, imagine this entire wall, this thick. I'm going to break it off, lie it down on its side, and put a big key on top of it. That's the marimba eroica keys. And those things just, as he was fond of saying, you don't hear it. You feel it. At one point, he actually made his living selling LP recordings, the mono recordings back in the 50s. And he was suggesting that, you know, it's really hard to capture these tones with modern stereophonic and even mono equipment. You have to have really expensive playback equipment, which is really a shame, because that means that the poorer of our population will not be able to have their bottoms rippled by a marimba eroica because the speakers aren't big enough to do that. And I got to tell you, it's visceral. It happens. Pretty amazing stuff. Let's just take a moment and get a little perspective on this. Here's a guy who raised in Arizona, came to LA to learn how to play music, ended up traveling as a bum, really, during the 1930s. Worked as an itinerant musician in the 1940s. He was a composer, but he also built, he designed, conceived of, and built every one of these musical instruments by himself. And of course, then performed on art, which is amazing. He was fond of saying later on in life, he says, I am a composer, I am a philosophic music man, seduced into carpentry. He wasn't a carpenter, and you know, between you and me, he wasn't that great a musical instrument builder. But my God, what an amazing job he did. Now, the reason why I'm particularly acutely aware of this is that for some crazy reason, I seem to have taken on exactly the same job, making these instruments. And I know how hard it is. And I am also a philosophic music man, seduced into paying other people to make them for me. Much better, much better. So, of course, he had a very difficult time making tiny little frets exactly right in Puritan. It's hard to do. So he took the easy way out and said, hey, why don't I make a... That's a bad rendition, but you know, hula music, right? That was the hip music in the 1930s. He bought a Hawaiian guitar, added 4 strings to it, and came up with a 10-string guitar, tuned like this. Love that last one. That's one of those 11s again. It's just slightly wacky. And of course, you can change microscopically, microtonally. His first compositions for this instrument were a duet with that diamond marimba. Our marimbas couldn't be with us today, so I'll just do a part of the guitar part of it. The Rose. With an ecstasy too sweet for mortal eyes. But sometimes down the jasper walls a petal falls toward earth and night. So, I grew up looking at pictures of this instrument in a book that Partch wrote. It's called Genesis of a Music, published first in 1949. Its second edition came out right before he died. And sadly, the picture of this instrument was in living black and white. And it was like this, and I thought, what the hell were those little triangles? Why would somebody put gray triangles on it? So it took me a few years. I actually met the original instrument, and they are, of course, colored triangles, and they are, of course, part of this relationship thing, right? Root, 3rd, 5th, 7th, 9th, 11th. So if everything is related to G, if that's the beginning of his universe, then notes don't have names. They don't have G, G sharp. They have numbers. But not like Julian Carrillo, which I didn't finish that thought. He invented 96 notes per octave. He created a completely brand new notation system. Numbers. So the 97th, or no, excuse me, like the 84th note, he put 84, and you would have to find it. Oh my God, I mean, it's impossible to play, you would think. He trained an entire generation of Mexican performers at the conservatory to play Beethoven using this notation system. I still don't believe it. I read it in a book. It's got to be true, right? But these notes are ratios, relationships, right? So, for example, da, da, those two notes together. One is that one is that one, but we all know in music that's called an interval of major third. Well, it turns out that's also the distance between the fourth harmonic in the harmonic series and the fifth harmonic. So that relationship is called a 5-4-5-4. And if you see the music, I actually brought some of his early music over there. It looks like an algebra problem. It's nothing but ratios, it's fractions, one on top of the other. And I've been doing this stuff long enough that when I see a 4-3, I go, oh yeah, it's a C. But you know, you think, what the hell, what is that? Literally, they are exact, specific relationships of the frequencies of how these notes are vibrating, right? Long story, and we won't get into it, but again, those of you that take on this amazing task of creating new sound worlds, the next issue is how do you, first of all, you create a musical instrument, then you create music. Or do you? Or do you just give it to the musicians and let them play with it? Most of the microtonal or experimental music you hear today is improvised. And there's a very real reason for that. It's so frickin' hard to write down. How do you write down the sound of a flute that plays 3 notes at the same time? How do you write down a chord like that? Everybody has to come up with their own particular solution, right? This is, I welcome you to that challenge. Every new generation has to come up with it. By the way, the original instrument, guitar, this one, he gave up on. And finally, took the very same instrument. It took me years to figure this out because everyone kept saying, where's the original adapted guitar number 1? Where'd it go? Did it get lost? Because he actually did lose a couple of instruments in his life. It turned out what he did was changed the stringing, made them all equidistant like a regular guitar, and then glued a colored fingerboard on top of it, covering up the old frets. So it still exists, but now it's called guitar number 3. How about this tuning? Was I playing a joke and just playing the same? No, 6 Gs all in a row. Why in the world? Well, it turns out that if you know anything about sympathetic vibration, that of course if something is tuned to something else, if one note on this instrument is tuned to a G, and I hit another G, and then let go, all the other ones go, they'll sing along in time, right? Because of course, the top of the guitar is moving at a G frequency, the bridge is moving at a G frequency, the saddle is moving at a G frequency, and if I hold down all these others to make another note and do that same thing, totally dead. But if I go like that, they're all singing along. So if you take just one note and go, all the other strings are ringing in it's a built-in reverb. What a cool idea. Did he think up sympathetic vibration? Ever heard of a sitar? Or a vina? They've only been doing it for 2,000 years in India, right? Or the Hardanger fiddle in Norway. It looks like a regular fiddle. It's got 4 strings played on the shoulder, but inside is a whole series, is a little harp of untouchable but tuned strings. So every time you hit that note, one of the strings goes, yeah, and, and it hums along at the same time. Great idea, right? So there's a wonderful, Harry had a very good sense of humor. Some of his music, I'll show you on the organ a little bit later, but there's a piece that we play called Plectra and Percussion Dances, and there's an Afro-Chinese minuet. And here's how the tune goes. It goes, wait a minute, let me get this right. It goes, once a year, right? He did this amazingly bizarre with all these instruments. little theme and variations on Happy Birthday. Crazy. And of course, what he never did do, because how can I resist? I'm also a composer, right? I've been writing music for these instruments. And the first thing I did when I got this was this. Why not? What a cool sound, right? And it turns out that in terms of equal division, if you want to go from here to here, wow. Want to go a little higher? It's inherent in the instrument. Let me speak for just a moment about idiomatic music. I'm going to say that again slowly. Not idiotic music. Idiomatic music, because ironically, most idiomatic music does tend to be rather idiotic, right? People find out what the instrument does easily and just do that. Well, that's kind of boring, actually. I ought to know. I'm a guitarist. It seems like at least 3/4 of the guitar music on this planet is easy to play, sounds good on the instrument, and that's about it, right? It doesn't go any deeper than that. It's a trap, right? Now, Parch built all these instruments, as you know. He composed for all these instruments. He could play every note he ever wrote. And in fact, he sort of had to, because who's going to play these instruments? He had to get people. I mean, he couldn't play them all at the same time, although that's not quite true. Les Paul, at the end of the 40s, early 1950s, invented something which changed musical history. It's called multi-track recording, right? Harry Parch was the first classical composer to ever use multi-track. He ended up taping parts and then playing along with himself, just because he couldn't get other people to play the instruments, right? So he was one of the first to do this overdubbing thing. One of his famous pieces called Daphne of the Dunes, which was a commission for a film written in 1956. It was specifically written for 4 instruments at a time, because that was all he could overdub at one time on this funky record. And in fact, there's a film of him doing it. It's just absolutely hilarious. And interesting all at the same time. Idea. Now, these are just 44-string table zithers. If I took away all of those bridges, it would be nothing but open G strings tuned to that G. Sometimes an octave lower on some of the lower ones. So basically, he called this like a palette, right? I can paint with bridges. Any note I want, I just move these bridges back and forth, just like a koto. So this one, as you can see, these are lined up together. These guys all go in a row. These are out of tune, sorry. And these guys. Put them together. Chords on the top. And then was that totally random? Well, yes and no, because the composition that he wrote for it actually uses those cards in the background. It goes. That's the melody. And what a racket, right? So on the right-hand side, we have it, but it's a bridge. Both sides work. So these also work. There's 3 places here. This is just brilliant, because of course each bridge has 2 sides. So you can have one chord here, another chord here, another chord here. And there's, of course, a very elaborate notation system that tells you exactly what to play. So part of the time I'm playing this chord, then switch to this. Set up in such a way, this particular one, you heard this tonality. That's from the opening of Castor and Pollux. I'm actually going to finish today by playing you a concert performance of that. That's one piece. Now, here's Pollux. It goes like this. So we've got another tonality entirely. Two completely different pieces out of one single set. New piece. Who wants to bother breaking it all down? He made another one. And he called these two, if you know anything about astrology or basic mythology, Castor and Pollux, right? The twins of Gemini. These are called Castor and Pollux. So not only were they used, this one only in Castor and Pollux, but this is something else. Now this, as you can tell, is going to be a gradual, not a kind of a random scale. Not from G to G, but to, it's a kind of a C sharp called a 10-7. So of course you can make beautiful chords when it's in tune. Let's see what we got here. We should be able to do here's my E. There's a G7 chord. But he also took advantage of the idiom. He wrote a piece called The Wind. And there's spoken voice and other instruments over the top, right? Isn't that cool? I mean, you can't do that on any other instrument. Well, Henry Cowell did it with a piano, right? He opened up the lid, put his foot down, and strummed the strings, but they were da 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 da. They were the 12 equal tempered notes. You get a different flavor when they're microtonally tuned and they're closer to each other, because two notes together. Hear that wavering? Remember those two notes on the diamond where they were very close, but if they're played simultaneously, they beat, they waver. So the multiple beatings gives us a certain shimmer, which is kind of cool. So yet another canon, right? Tuned to another scale. And again, this whole concept of multiples, he just loved that sound. This is from the opening of King Oedipus. An opera he wrote in 1952. Now what is it really all about musically? That minor third. There's a whole bunch of them. Now you could have had somebody sit there and go on one string, but it's a different sound. And notice I'm going to do it really slowly. He's got a little. Now they're all the same. And they sort of fall off again, right? On the other side. So we created this texture. barbershop pole. You've ever heard that? There's a famous, I think it's a Jim Tin, no, it's a Jean-Paul Risset piece, where there's an ascending spiral of tone, and it keeps going up, and all of a sudden it refreshes itself from the bottom, and it's always going, this is always going down, but it never reaches the bottom either. So this is one of the other harmonic canons, but Harry, by the way, that's a Cathara. That was Cathara number 1. He built Cathara 2, Cathara 3, because oftentimes the instrument wouldn't do what he needed it to do, so we'd have to improve on it. And he said there are reasons to rebuild musical instruments. If they don't do what you want them to do, if you need to express yourself differently, the diamond marimba, where you can go faster than any marimba player on the planet, well, after a while, he got a little bored with that and said, well, wouldn't it be cool if it could go, if it could go up? So I guess if he were mechanically minded, he could have had some way to sort of hydraulically change it all. He didn't. He built an entirely different diamond shape where physically high to low made the pitch go physically low to high. So if you had 2 players, one on the quadrangularis reversum, that's what he called it, and one on the diamond marimba, it'd go pew, 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 pew. Wow, right? Just what the idiom does. But he had an image in his mind. So now I have a little story to tell you. We had a public performance of Plectra and Percussion Dance. It's this huge piece. He had 4 harmonic canons to do this because the movements had different fretings, right? Well, I'm not independently wealthy, and I couldn't afford to make a 4th canon, so I came up with an idea. Strings on both sides. So you flip it over, and you get a completely different fret. So, voila. And then, totally different scale. Oh, we lost a bridge on the trip, right? So why not? Why not use both sides, right? So this is not an original Parch instrument, but it's a gloss on an original Parch instrument. There was an issue, there was a problem, this is a solution, something that he didn't come up with. So I wondered for a long time, what should I call it? For a while we called it Flipper. Now it's called Janus, the two-faced god. Isn't that much more mythical? Right? This piece, Castor and Pollux, I was playing a little while ago, is for a lot of these instruments, one of which, he had a really awful part where there was melodies going here. I mean, the player just had to go nuts. It was too damn hard to play. So he said, okay, that's, why don't I do something else? Why don't I take the slidey bits and put them somewhere else? So this is called a surrogate guitar, right? He took the sliders and just made them individual. And each one of these, actually, ta-da! You can actually make one of these if you go down to Osh, right? The Orchard Supply House place, and get yourself a nice redwood planter box. Get a little balsa wood, glue it on the top, you've got a soundboard. There you are. 25 bucks later, you got yourself a resonant body. Then you go to Guitar Center, buy a couple of these, or maybe a couple of pegs to screw in. You can make yourself a monochord, or this has 8 strings on it. Okay, it's not that resonant, is it? But at least you can hear it, right? It's not like strumming an electric guitar string. But now you take the same box and put it on here, and you'll see immediately. Wow! Resonance. This is resting on its own resonator, right? So this custom box does nothing but takes the vibration from the bottom of these things and amplifies it. So again, when you start dealing with musical instruments, you have a couple things to think about. Where's the oscillator? Where's the vibrator? What's putting the energy to make the sound? Then, how do you amplify the sound? Do you do it electronically? Do you do it acoustically? Now, the instruments that he chose, he tended towards stringed instruments and idiophones, they're called, right? The, not idiot phones, but idiophones. Hello, idiot phone. The marimbas, things that you actually hit. There are, of course, membranophones, which use, they're like drums, skin drums. And in fact, he made a whole series of very interesting instruments called boobams, which were in fact bamboo tubes with skin on the top. And you can do this, wait a minute, can you say Blue Man Group? Anybody ever seen Blue Man Group? They made their living doing that, right? A bunch of PVC, you just tape some stuff on the top, you got yourself a drum. You tune it by the length. There was actually a guy down on the boardwalk years ago who took bongo drums and put tubes on them and tuned them, and he was playing all sorts of, you know, somewhere my love, da, 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 da. It was a living, I guess, so he's not there anymore. But you see the concept. Make something vibrate, amplify it, and why not do it electronically? You know, I mean, we have that technology available. Electric guitar pickups are dead cheap. Microphones, contact mics are incredibly cheap. John Cage, ever heard of him? John Cage has a wonderful piece for amplified cactus. You put a contact mic on a kick and you pluck the little spine. Those are oscillators, right? And they're pitched. They're percussive and they're pitched. And you made this whole incredible piece out of them. Very cool idea. You can basically make music with anything. You have to ask yourself some basic questions, however. After you figure out, well, who knows, maybe before. What sort of sounds do you want to make? Do you want them to be pitched? Do you want them to be unpitched? That's where the whole noise element comes in, because metal makes a great unpitched sound. Of course, drums have their own story, but how you resonate them, the shape, the pitch, etc., etc. I could not recommend highly enough the book Experimental Musical Instruments, Bart Hopkins. It's in paperback. It's so helpful. If you get interested in any kind of these instruments, whether it's membranophones, strings, rods, beams, anything, he will show you the formulas about what to use, how to cut it, how to determine the pitch. Very cool stuff. One of the things that I hope that it would be so nice, this is about the right room for it too. There is a musical instrument called let me get this right, VLSI, the VLSI, the very long stringed instrument. It is made of 15 musical strings that if it was in here right now, they would be attached to this wall. They would be attached to that wall. That's how long they are. They are played with rosined gloves, and you walk along them to get them to vibrate. As you know, strings vibrate, duh. They usually vibrate this way, but they also vibrate longitudinally too. In fact, that's why you often get this, hard to do it, oh I know it. I'm sure you heard this terrible sound. Can I put my fingernails on the chalkboard for you now? But that squeak is in fact the string not going back and forth, but moving up and down, lengthways. So longitudinal vibration is also available. There's a wonderful, wonderful musical instrument. The guy that inherited all of the Parch Instruments, who runs that program at Montclair State, invented something called just stroke rods. They are metal, long rods. They're grabbed in the middle, and you can play them on either end. Each side is slightly different length, so they create a different pitch. You wear rosin gloves, and you go like this, or do it with your individual finger, right? And they make these amazingly high, eerie sounds. It's very, very interesting. There's also a gentleman up in Northern California named Chris Forster, who was actually hired by the Parch Institution after Parch died to rebuild all these instruments. And he went off on his own tangent and has made a diamond marimba that goes up to the 13th harmonic, a bass marimba that goes to the 13th harmonic, a retuned piano, not an organ, but he also made something called the glass dance. Ever gone like that on a wine glass? Mm-hmm. Well, I'm sure you know about the glass bowls that they're called glass harmonica. You pump your head and put your fingers on them. Benjamin Franklin invented the darn thing. It's been around for a very long time. Well, he thought this would be better. He made a box about like this, and sticking out of it are, I think it's 7 by 7, so it's like 49 rotating wine glasses. In the back are all these plates and pulleys and things making them spin constantly, and you turn it on and the motor just, and they start spinning, and you go up and you play the glasses. It's called glass dance. It's an elegant thing, and if you go on their website, Chrysalis is the name of his original instrument. This is another guy that just went nuts and thought, well, what would be a harmonic cannon? Your step going up and down. What would happen if you made a circular cannon? He used as his image, you know, the ancient Aztec calendar, which says we're all going to eat it in 2012. Yeah, that one. Thank you very much. He made a musical instrument where it was a circle. All the way around the outside were tuning pins, like you see in the piano. In the center, but not the exact center, off center, was a circle. He made strings go all the way around to each one and tuned it, and he did the same thing on both sides. So you play this thing, you sit like this, and it's a big circle like this. You spin it, and hold your finger, and you can play both sides at the same time. He's written all this amazing music for it with intoning voice. He's obviously a huge debt to Harry Partch. Early 1950s, Partch was befriended by somebody that worked at Lawrence Livermore Labs, and he noticed that there were a bunch of glass bowls hanging around that were used for early atomic experiments. Ever heard of cloud chamber experiments? Where you get a big, that looks like, well, it looks like one of these. Imagine this with that bottom on it. It's about that long. You fill it with gas of some sort of inert gas, and bombard it with subatomic particles and then photograph it. And if you're into the history of science at all, that's where some of the early particle experiments were done. So they were called cloud chambers. Well, Harry saw those and thought, what would happen if you cut one and suspended it? It must sound really cool. And you know, he was right. He calls them the cloud chamber bowls. How the hell do you cut a cloud chamber bowl? The answer is, of course, very carefully. They're made out of Pyrex. They're very thick. And there's really, unless you want to spend a whole lot of money, there's no way to tune them. In order to tune it correctly, you would have to have a large vibrating gravel plate with grit and liquid in it. It takes days and days and days and thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. So what did Harry do? He just got a whole bunch of these things and cut them and figured out, well, what did I get? What sort of pitch? And then he would put them in order from ascending to descending. Now, I'm not quite as crazy as he was. Imagine now, one of these guys, top and bottom, you take a glass cutter and score it around, you roll it so it's an exact, so he would score it, take toaster wire, gauge 18 wire, wrap it around, twist it, take those two ends, stick them into a socket, Wait till it glows nice and red and hot, just like a toaster. Quickly now, unplug it, unwrap it, and throw the bottle into cold water. It breaks right on the line.
Brilliant.
Amazing. And he still had all his fingers, right? And no scars, as far as we know. Very sharp, of course. I wasn't either that brave or crazy. So I ended up finding a whole bunch of these things. They still make them, right? Pyrex and Company makes these things. They're called carboys. They're used for storing, nowadays, chemical components and things. And what I didn't know, before I made this instrument, I spent months with photographs, measuring the originals, and making sure I got exactly the right distance from top to bottom. The originals are gone. They broke years ago. And I wanted to recreate the original music from the 40s, so I measured these on the photographs and did them proportionally and cut them exactly where they were supposed to sound. And guess what? They didn't sound anything like the originals. Not even close. Guess why? They're all different thicknesses. The damnedest thing. It turns out that Pyrex, they just make molds and they just squirt the hot glass in there. They don't care how thick it is, as long as it's thick enough not to break, right? So I had to do the same thing. I cut a whole bunch of them. I needed 11. I cut up 20 of these big bottles and just put them in a row. And what happens if they break? Touch wood, right? Well, they do. I've already broken one. You have to either have a sub, or whenever Harry's broke, he would have to rewrite all the parts. Oh, what a pain, what a pain. What a sound, There's really nothing quite like it. Now, a lot of people who can a lot, okay, count on two hands, have started writing music for these instruments again. And again, what you're seeing here is about half of what he put out. Genesis of the Music, this wonderful book, has all these 24 of his original instruments, plus a little hand instruments and things like that, with their full description and their history. Genesis of the Music. We Parchers call it the Book of Genesis, right? He was absolutely anti-religion, that's another story. But it turns out that the Genesis is not just a history book, it's a cookbook. There's enough information in there that you can actually almost perfectly reproduce these instruments, because he does give you dimensions of wooden bars, of resonators, of how the pitches work, that sort of thing. Unfortunately, it's not exactly everything you need, so thank heavens the originals are still around. And that's what I ended up doing, going and visiting the originals, recording, measuring, doing photographing, and then taking things from there. So, if you don't mind, let me show you how all these things fit together. Castor and Pollux, twins, right? This composition is written for, right now, you see there's two marimbas being played, the bass marimba and the diamond marimba. There are two dancers dancing. Well, this is already the third movement. The first movement had Kithara, which is over here, and the cloud chamber bowls. The second section had harmonic cannon and Kithara. And every time each pair of instruments played, another pair of dancers came out and did a completely different dance. What happens next is that duet number 1, instruments and dancers, duet number 2, instruments and dancers, and this duet number 3, instrument and dancers, all perform at the same time as a sextet. The music fits like this. This is a brand new choreography by a choreographer here in LA called Liz Heffner. So we're about to end this one, and then we'll get into the actual sextet. insemination on stage, I promise you. This is all about, the story of Castor and Pollux. They were created when the god came down and inseminated the swan, Leda, and well, the rest is history. So I'm going to stop it there because that was the end of Castor. Then the entire process happens again with Pollux. A duet, a duet, a duet, totally different music, and then a sextet. It all comes together beautifully. The music also, the players don't run into each other, and the notes don't either. They make harmony together. Questions? Who's got questions? Comments? Whatever?
I was wondering how he distinguished the frequencies. It seems like they're like really fine-tuned. How did he figure that out?
Oh, that's such a good question. He had incredible ears.
Yeah.
Incredible ears, and he worked it all out mathematically. Genesis of the Music actually at the back has a table of more than, I think it's 180 pitches per note, all done mathematically in terms of, and this is a whole other scene because you can measure pitch with actual frequencies, but we don't perceive pitch that way. We perceive pitch as something called sense, or what is now called sense. And he worked out all the sense tables of what those were. He did them by ear.
Wow.
Nowadays, what you may not have noticed is the most important piece of equipment in this entire room. In the far corner, do you see that little black box with two dials on it? This is 1960s technology. People do it with computers now, but this is my best friend. It is used, was designed, of course, as that's 12 notes per octave, right? But if you want to go in between the notes, that's minus 50 cents, minus a quarter tone. That's back up here again. Tiny little changes, right? Now, in fact, hours of fun too, because if you ever want to control your voice, the job is make the cymbals stop spinning. Now, if you've ever, music majors, if you've seen these in 1,000 band rooms, right? That's how band players do. But the fine tuning is the whole trick now. So Harry did it originally by tuning the intervals by ear.
Wow.
And then originally, his harmonic canon, that was supposed to lay down the law. It turned out that it wasn't that accurate, and from then on he used the chromolodium as his steady, and then he would tune all the wooden instruments to that. But amazing that he did it without electronics. Right? The guy's ears were phenomenal. Sorry.
Cool.
Any other questions? Feel free, this is kind of a petting zoo. If you want to come around and poke and pet and do all that stuff, I'll leave this.